Good afternoon, everyone. We would like to welcome Dr. Mitchell Richmond from University of Tennessee. So a little background about him. So he graduated from the Morehead University and got his master's and PhD from the University of Kentucky. And he went on to work for the Canadian Tobacco Research Foundation. And he moved back to Tennessee, and he's currently working as an extension specialist for tobacco, hemp, and special crops at UT. His work consists of tobacco, hemp, hops, and a little bit of work on ginger and ginseng as well. So I would love to invite him to share some of his work with us today.
That one off.
It should be, get up there and we'll see it, so that's the exact word.
Shows a red light.
It should be up.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thanks for having me back. It's certainly good to be back at UK. It's as Bob Miller said in my interview at UT. Mitchell, are you going to be able to wear that god awful orange color? So I will say that it is nice to wear the orange color, although I still wear a lot of blue underneath any orange that I wear going to any games. So glad to be here. And look, I had a great day. Thanks to the graduate students for arranging, and especially you, Monica, for my day-to-day. It was nice to go around campus, meet with some folks that I spent the better part of 6 years with. And so yeah, today I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing down at UT. And the graduate students, when I was talking to them about coming up to give a little bit of a talk, it was more focused on the career and less on science. So you'll see today that I'm just going to give an overview of kind of my mindset of why we're doing some of the work we're doing at UT. And I'm going to try to rope in the experience that I had as a graduate student here for 6 years at UK before joining the CTRF to work with flue-cured tobacco. And to get started, I'm from Northeast Kentucky. I grew up on a burley farm. The picture on the screen is my great uncles plowing our tobacco patch. I was not born yet at the time. Thankfully, I've never been involved with this kind of weed control ever. Hope to never be involved with that kind. Bob, have you ever been behind a mule or horse plow? No. I'm thankful that I have not. And that's no pitch on your age, but thankfully we got to rely a little bit more on the steel that has an engine. But that picture is taken in '81. My family grew tobacco. I think it was 1937 is what my grandpa told me for burley. So yeah, around 1940s, and then he quit right around the buyout, and that's whenever I started working for another operation. Working with tobacco, burley tobacco only. We would occasionally see that weird dark tobacco plant in the field and wonder what in the world happened, because in my area we never really saw dark tobacco. So now at UT I get to cover all types of tobacco that's grown in Tennessee and Kentucky, which has been a blessing because my graduate experience here at UK was with all types of tobacco grown in Kentucky and Tennessee. So it's really coming back to home. So I will repeat what Monica said, that I did my undergrad at Morehead, focused on ag education, leadership, and communication, and decided that I wanted to be a high school ag teacher. And it was there that I met a couple of professors that really said, Mitchell, I think that you should consider graduate school. You might really like the change that graduate degrees bring, and teaching at a higher level. So I'm glad that advice was there, because then I got to come here and meet Dr. Pierce and Dr. Bailey, who really shaped the rest of my career. And I got to experience going to Canada and working with the tobacco crop. And it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot transitioning from a graduate student to really becoming somewhat of a director. It was a team leader position, but it was all activities at CTRF. And I had the opportunity to have about a 50% extension appointment with the 25% research and a 25% administrative. So really, I kind of led all the extension efforts, and it was really nice to have the well-rounded program that I have here, with going to field days, going on farm visits, working on the applied research that was geared towards producer decisions, And that really shaped my program up there. And then the other thing that was really interesting is I got to work with another type of tobacco that I hadn't got to work with in Kentucky. And so flue cured is not raised in Kentucky, it is raised in Ontario. So I was able to learn a new crop because it is managed a lot differently than burley or dark tobacco. And while in Canada, I got to serve as the liaison for the board of directors, which was all the big tobacco companies that are involved in Canadian leaf, from Philip Morris International to British American Tobacco, all your bigs, even Grand River Enterprises, which is the native reserve tobacco production up there. And also the growers had positions there. So in the board at the CTRF, I was able to get all the information from all the parties, from the leaf dealers all the way to the leaf manufacturers and the growers' perspective on what they're trying to meet on the demand. And all the committees had that same type of, I guess, organization across. So it was a really great experience in terms of learning how to shape my program to better serve the growers, better serve the industry, and the various aspects of government and regulators. Something that I really enjoyed was the Tobacco Review and Evaluation Committee, which is more of the sensory organoleptic evaluations. Every plot that we grew in Canada, there was a designated reason why we're doing it. We weren't able to really just do passion projects. That's the difference between academia and kind of industry, is that basically the board decides where you're going to target your efforts. And a lot of our efforts were directly related to variety development and pesticide registration and maintaining the integrity of the Canadian crop that went into the Canadian products that Canadian consumers could tell a difference on. They always told the story that they brought up some American tobacco in that product, and that product quickly went away because Canadians hated American style cigarettes, and that was because they thought it tasted like perfume. I have no idea why that they said that, but they did. But in the Tobacco Review and Evaluation Committee, we were responsible for taking our plots all the way from seed through harvest, through curing, and making those prototype cigarettes to be distributed to all the companies. And then they would give us the sensory data back, and we could make real-time decisions on what we could do as far as protection products, if it passed that test, and varieties. And it's amazing to me that that not all products pass, not all varieties pass, and there's a reason for that. So that was a really good experience for me. I spent about 3.5 years at the CTRF, and it was really eye-opening going from graduate student to this kind of position, to where you're kind of involved with a lot of things. You got a lot of hats. You're working with growers, you're working with industry, and so I'm very fortunate that I had that opportunity. So a little bit about the tobacco production belt up there. It's in Southwest Ontario, which surprisingly is about 20% south of probably more than 20% of the U.S. Until I went up there and saw the crops that are grown, I kind of had this false mindset that there wouldn't be much production there. But in the late 70s, early 80s, they had 280 million pounds of flue cured tobacco being grown there. So that's quite a lot. That's equivalent to what Kentucky has been in the past. The mouse tree.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, so I just wanted to throw up some pictures and kind of show the evolution of my program up there, which has influenced my program at UT. Essentially, what are the growers after? What's the industry after? And what's out there in the political landscape that we might need to be cognizant of to kind of gear our programs towards. And so whenever I first got to Canada in 2018, I accepted the job in 2017, and about a month before I accepted the job, we were interviewing, and they had found tobacco cyst nematode. It was the first report of tobacco cyst nematode in Canada, and growers were starting to have a lot of issues with that. And so the first project that we really started was hey, how do we combat this? Can we use some various cover crops? We know that there are some cover crops like rye that might be more susceptible to certain types of nematodes. And the ginseng market was an external pressure on the tobacco production in Canada, because there's such a straw demand from a ginseng side whenever they're planting all those acres under shade, that they have to have a lot of straw when they're establishing and overwintering the ginseng. And so a lot of growers were kind of having this market for rye or straw, and so that's what they went with. So we were exploring some like millet and some other things to try to break cycles. And so that was some of the work that we did. I guess fortunately or unfortunately, we did find some results, but we didn't really find much that could take care of that tobacco cyst nematode. Mainly because once it's in that cyst, it's really hard to control. So we found out that if you do grow the ryegrass, there's a root lesion nematode, and it appears that tobacco cyst nematodes and root lesion nematodes kind of interact with each other. And if one population's higher, one's lower. And so we can control root lesion nematodes pretty well with fumigation. So the next picture up in the top, that was the cover crops up here. This is looking at some various fumigation type products. We had some bio fumigants like it's called Dominus. I think it was Aleosynthate or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was like, anyways. And then there was the chlorpicrin. They had lost some of their C17 type products, which are still used in North Carolina, but they're not allowed up with Canadian policy. The Pest Management Regulatory Agency kind of banned those. And so we were basically, we found the problem, growers are demanding answers, industry were demanding answers, and we started making real-time projects to try to address those. And so moving on, we also started looking at tobacco cyst nematode resistant varieties. So we started selecting our breeding program. We reached out around the world and found some genetics that we thought that might confer resistance. And so that was kind of the bigger push from whenever I first started. Well, my first season, I realized that they did not have axillary bud control products like we do in Kentucky or Tennessee. And axillary buds or suckers are pretty important for managing. If you manage your suckers, you have less non-tobacco related material, you have less problem with yield. And so we started a fairly robust sucker evaluation program. We knew that there's products out there like maleic hydrazide, like your local systemics from Edgeland that work. It's just they weren't registered in Canada. And fun fact, and the reason they weren't registered in Canada was they thought that nitrosamines were directly impacted by dinitroaniline. And so that's the reason why Canada said absolutely not. We're not going to put any dinitroaniline products on tobacco because it increases TSNA. So we started generating data, and they're currently working on getting those registered now to save labor costs, because labor cost is a major issue. And some of the other pictures, this is a picture of a chamber we built looking at pole rot, which is a pretty big contributor for some post-harvest losses in tobacco up in Canada. You can see this picture here, this brown leaf on this stick here. That's all pole rot. Anything that's yellow is looking good. We were able to get control. And that was with some various variety and fungicide trials. And then at the end of the season, of course, we had variety displays where growers would come in and say, yeah, I want to try this variety, or no, I don't. So it was really a really robust program that I'm glad that I got to spend 3 years further developing my skill set to eventually come down to University of Tennessee and serve as a tobacco specialist, which I also get to serve as the hemp and specialty crops extension specialist too. So I get to learn a lot about some other crops. And just to give you some data, Rebecca, here are some error bars, but it is a bar chart. I don't know where she went. There you are. We were talking at lunch today about not putting error bars on your charts and how publications can get through without that. But anyways, that's all besides the point. So this graph is showing a few different treatments. We're trying to look at more of the organic type sucker control products as well. But this is the grower standard. It's the only product that they have in Canada. It's Physol 10, and it's basically a long chain fatty acid contact type product. It's a C10 product. And Drexel Chemical Company out of Memphis was willing to explore labeling some products up there. And so we had various combinations of their flumetulin-based products, Drexel Plus, as well as TAC Plus, which is basically the alcohol combined with the flumetulin. And so this is grams of axillary suckers per plant. And as you can see, this is what a grower would be experiencing year after year at the end of season. And this is what our products were that were in there were able to do. The paleogarnic acid or Beluga didn't necessarily work, but I want to show some pictures. So this is what the grower standard looks like. You have some escapes. Any dark spots that you see, dark leaf would be a sucker. This is a fluke crop after it's about to be harvested for the last pass. And so that's what you would typically see. So all of these suckers that are up above that crop, they're going to pay somebody to come in and break those out before it gets harvested. Because it's mechanically harvested, anything in the field is going to go through the harvester. It's going to end up in the bale that gets sold to the company. And so this is a much cleaner. So this is the 5-10 and Drexel Plus. This is a really good looking plot. And this is just showing you pictures that go along with the data. And by the time that we entered the TAC Plus seemed to work a little bit better than the Drexel Plus. It had the alcohol mixed with it. Essentially, these are clean. We didn't see any, no surprises. We saw great, excellent control with using these local systemic products. But whenever we introduced Beluga to the mix, we sprayed Beluga 5 times compared to 1 or 2 times here with these other products, and we just simply couldn't control it at the rates that we were evaluating, mainly because if we increase that rate too much, we would also get some phytotoxicity, which would not be good either. So that was just an example of one of the trials that we were running because of grower interest. And then the companies that are the leaf buyers were super interested because of the production costs. Tobacco price per pound hasn't drastically increased. Other than this year, it's went up quite a bit. But in the past, it's been pretty flat. And so labor costs and other costs have always increased, but trying to maintain profitability on the grower side is always a challenge. So I put this slide up there mainly for the graduate students, but take all the experience you can while you're here, because you never know what exact, what field day that you lecture at, or what farm call you might go with, or what professor you might find in the lab that's working on something that you might be able to get a little bit of exposure to that might help you in the future. And so a lot of the things that I was involved with here, particularly while in UK working with Dr. Bailey and Dr. Pierce, was maybe more successful whenever I entered the Canadian Tobacco Research Foundation. And then while at the CTRF, I really focused on keeping those relationships that I had, but also building relationships with other interested parties to try to focus my program and therefore make my program more fundable based on what they're interested in. Because if you're targeting what they're interested in and you're interested in that same thing, I found that ends up being a recipe for success for getting more money to your program. So I said that I cover all crops of tobacco, or all types of tobacco. This is Connecticut broadleaf. I know there's some work at UK. I think Caleb has a project with Connecticut broadleaf. We're running some of those similar trials. We ran some for his master's project, but unfortunately lost those. But we do a fair amount of burley and a lot more dark fired and dark air cured. And then we ventured into industrial hemp over the last 2 years. The first part of my first season, we focused on floral hemp. There's a lot of pressure when I first started the job, looking at some various things that might impact, because Tennessee was one of the last states that went to the total THC regulation, whereas in Kentucky, you guys had already been practicing that. So there was a lot of growers that were essentially, hey, I'm changing from Delta 9 THC measurements to total THC. How do I do this? And so we put out a little bit of a trial there to try to serve them. And fortunately, Bob, you had some really good data for sample timing that we were saying, hey, sample your crop. Don't wait until it's too late. And then as more of a passion project based on some recent interest, we've started getting into hops. I'll talk about that in a minute. And ginger. I never thought that I'd work with ginger. There's a food science guy at UT that's super interested in some flavor compounds coming from ginger. So we've been partnering up with him a little bit, as well as some ginseng. There's a current student, or a previous student here, Ethan Swigert, that worked under Kerry Knott. He's actually at the International Institute of Ginseng at Middle Tennessee State now. And so we've partnered up on a few projects there. So my program for agronomy, we have about 35 to 45 tobacco experiments, field experiments each year, and really ranges from basically seed to sale, anything in between. We do some curing work, we do variety evaluations, fungicides, We're currently trying to help write the label for emergency use for a new product for us. About 8 to 10 fiber grain dual purpose trials. We're not doing any floral experiments. My program has not been funded for floral research, although I do get a lot of calls about it. If you go trying to find some funds to help cover that, it's just really not there. But a lot of the Tennessee hemp enthusiasts are really focused on fiber, and so we've really focused our efforts there. We're putting up a 1 acre research hop yard. I know that Kentucky had one down at Quicksand for a while, and we're going to try to grow hops in Tennessee, even though hops typically won't do well in Southeast states. But we're going to try to put some supplemental lighting above the yard. Memphis at AgriCenter International has had some luck. They claim that they double their yields whenever they put supplemental lights above the hop yard. We'll see how that goes. Florida did that and had some success. So we're going to go down this rabbit hole and see if we can find some way to grow some local hops. So just a kind of a broad overview of the tobacco program that we have at UT. Thankfully, I'm able to partner with Dr. Zach Hansen. He's a pathologist. It's really important for a physician like mine to have that counterpart in pathology because that's a lot of the questions we get is in pathology. So thankfully, I have that. I have access to him, and he's interested in tobacco work. But we've been doing some greenhouse work, particularly with black shank race typing. We had a student come through that just finished up, did a lot of work in the greenhouse from isolates that we collected in fields across Tennessee and Kentucky, North Carolina, trying to figure out what the race types were for black shank across the 3 states. A lot of work on field preparation. We've been doing some of the ridging work. If you guys have been at Spindletop, you've probably seen Dr. Pierce's work, looking at kind of the climate resiliency of tobacco by trying to put it on ridges. We've been doing that more from a labor saving standpoint in dark tobacco. Dark tobacco doesn't have that upright growth that burley has. We tend to have a lot more crooked tobacco grow, and so we're trying to look at it as a labor savings. If you plant tobacco on a ridge, do you get a better root system? In fact, can you also take that in direct spray versus drop line? Because in dark tobacco, we typically, after we top it, we have to spray something because it loses that apical dominance. And so we're typically going through and manually applying that to each plant, which is what they call drop line. So we're trying to eliminate or at least target some things that might eliminate drop nozzles by basically planting on ridges and then spraying over top rather than individuals going through the field doing that, which would save money. And also hopefully for the more frequent, or I guess less frequent, more intense rainfalls we get, maybe we can get that water off the field. So today I'm going to show a little bit of data on some harvest timing work with burley that we've been doing, but we've also been doing some supplemental heat. The cigar wrapper crop that came into Kentucky and Tennessee a few years ago has a kind of a niche market, and you know, we're told today that Kentucky passed medical marijuana, and so it appears that a lot of this cigar wrapper crop has been going to support that the recreational type marijuana, because I guess it's going to wrap those type products. So we've been getting a lot of questions on how do we increase that wrapper percentage in those cigar wrapper types. And so we're trying to target some curing work where we might add heat at certain stages of the cure that would limit the amount of imperfections in the leaf, predominantly coming from Cercospora, which is Prog leaf spot, late season infections that might carry into the barn. So we're trying to play with that. Last year was an extremely dry year for curing, and all we did was basically flash cure anything that we added heat to. But we are exploring some of those things. All right, so looking at timing of burley harvest. So if you look at the production guide, we say 3 to 5 weeks after topping, and that 4 weeks after topping is optimal. And you should be looking at the midrib, turning cream to white in color before you make that decision to harvest. And we know that by 6 weeks after topping, the yield and quality tends to decline. And what's interesting is if you look back at a study that was conducted down at the Greenville Experiment Station in Tennessee in 1948, it is the exact same recommendation. So even after that many years, we still have the same exact recommendations. And, you know, Dr. Miller is a great tobacco breeder, and after all those advancements in tobacco breeding and genetics, we're still right along those same lines. And so here's some of that data. If you look, I just want to point out that this 25 days is kind of the optimum. This is in 1948. They used Kentucky 16. They're getting 2,270 pounds there at that 25 days after, right around that 2,300 pounds again, 25 days after topping. So nothing has changed in terms of harvest recommendations for that many years. Our recommendations are still in line with those data. And so, of course, topping is the removal of that terminal bud or inflorescence of the plant. We break that out because we're interested in the leaf, not the flower or seed. And it is known to improve yield, leaf quality, certain secondary chemistries, those kinds of things. But we also know that loss of apical dominance encourages axillary buds to start forming. And the more axillary buds that form, the less yield we can get, and the more NTRM or non-tobacco related material we can get. So we're targeting that 10 to 25% bloom and trying to encourage a true tip grade, which has some length requirements by topping higher. Now, I don't think many growers are topping at 22 to 24 leaves. Bob, would you agree? They're more probably 18 tops. But I know that's our standard recommendation, and that's based on what we see. So maleic hydrazide is the only true systemic product. We can spray it broadcast, absorb through the leaf, translocates through the plant, and inhibits sucker formation. Local systemics have to touch each leaf axil as it goes throughout the plant, so it's more of a directed spray that swirls down the plant and controls suckers by local systemic activity. Our only product now is flumestrine. We lost the other product that we had due to the manufacturer not making anymore. But we also know that MH is very stable and can lead to excessive residues. And so anything that we can do to lower those residues is always a benefit. And we also know that PSNAs, which are very variable year after year and hard to study, but we know that the time of harvest impacts PSNAs mainly due to the accumulation of alkaloids. But we also have access to the LC protocol, which lowers the amount of conversion from nicotine to nornicotine, and that's just the precursors that end up in some of the PSNAs, particularly NNN. And so there was some previous work that looked at unscreened seed that did show an increase in conversion as you got further away from topping. I'm not going to show data on that, but we did not see any change at all, but we used LC seed. All right, so we designed an experiment that was in East Tennessee, and we did it for 2 years, and we topped, and then we harvested 2 weeks after topping, and then each week all the way down to 6 weeks after topping. And so looking at this graph, we have weeks after topping along the X, starting at 2 weeks, after topping over to 6 weeks. The stock positions are color-coded: tip, leaf, lug, and flying, and that's the part of the plant that they would be on if you're going to relate that to the burley plant. On the y-axis, we have pounds per acre yield. And so recommendations are still in line. We might actually need to switch that to optimal being 5, depending on what, I guess what quality ends up being, which that's another discussion. I think that the tobacco scientists around the U.S. need to find a better way of looking at leaf quality grade index, but maybe that can be a charge for a committee that happens at the next conference. But anyways, yield increases up until about that 4 to 5 week time frame, and then it does decrease at 6 weeks after. In terms of quality, 2 weeks after topping compared to 6 weeks after topping, in my opinion, would be tremendously different in terms of quality. However, we were not able to detect any differences. I mean, our grade index was low at this stage in 2021. I was like, man, we really can't grow good tobacco here in our program. But overall, grade index is a 0 to 100. It's based on the U.S. federal grades. It's converted into a number that we use as an index based on the yield of each component. stock component. And we didn't see anything here in 2021, but there was an interaction, but it looks like that there's just some noise here that I don't quite understand, which I debated on taking this slide out, but I'm hoping that knowing that Kentucky has several researchers looking at tobacco, that maybe this is an area that we can improve on how we look at quality grade, and maybe we come up with a new quality grade in the future to be able to compare notes. But regardless, there's really no real results I want to take from this other than we saw a lot of noise. But we did see increase in total alkaloids as this is a 4th leaf sample, and as again 2 weeks after, 6 weeks after, and as we got further from topping, we did see an increase in total alkaloids, which would be predominantly nicotine, but 3 to 5 weeks, we were around at 3.7 to 4.2. We did have a little bit of a spike here to 4.88 whenever we took that out to 6 weeks after topping, which does have an implication for this next slide that I'll show for TSNA. And so this is 2021 data. I don't have both years analyzed. Thankfully, folks over at KTRDC are going to be analyzing those in the next couple of months, so we'll be able to compare that. But 2 to 5 weeks, we did not have any significant change. However, we did get a spike here. Presumably, this is more due to the environment at the 6 weeks after topping than it is anything else. But we did have the most amount of precursor, which would have been the total alkaloids higher at this point in time. So we did see this spike. I hope that we don't see that same spike again this year, but we'll see. So what time do we finish? Is it 3:45? Is it?
You're good. You've got until 4.
All right, wonderful.
So, yep.
I should have asked that before. So yeah, our recommendations I think are still adequate, and we do know that yield will decline. Our data from 2 years also supports that. But I do think that we need to come up with a better system for evaluating leaf quality, because I was able to look at those tobacco plots and pick out which ones were more mature based on the timing. I was able to look and say, hey, that's one that's closer to 6 weeks after, and this one's closer to 2 weeks after. But with the way we use the federal grading system, I was not able to detect anything there. I didn't show the data, but MH residues started around 50 parts per million, and they tended to go down to about 30 parts per million in both of these years. But we didn't see any significant effects, but 2 weeks after topping was always the highest, which makes sense because maleic hydrazide is a very stable molecule. And when we apply it, the further away that we are from application, the more chance for rainfall to reduce those residues. And we did see that environment and precursor issue with 6 weeks after topping resulting in that spike in tobacco-specific nitrosamines. For those of you that are not closely related to tobacco, that would be some of the known carcinogens from the leaf. All right, so I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about our hemp program that we have, particularly the agronomy, and some of the work that we've been doing and some of the work that we're going to be doing over the next 5 years. And so we have been doing a little bit of seed germination work. We have a student in entomology, plant pathology that's super interested in corn earworm. He's been doing a lot of that work on floral tops. I'm hoping to switch him more to the fiber tops, or sorry, grain and fiber in the future. And I have a tremendous amount of undergraduate research interest in the hemp side. So we're hoping to include some of those undergraduates in our research program. They're super interested. So if you guys have any ideas for collaborations, I would love to explore that. Most of my program has been in the field. We've been doing a lot of cultivar evaluations for all the major types, fiber, grain, and dual purpose. We also did a floral hemp study for 2 years where we evaluated a couple cultivars at different nitrogen fertility, but mainly that was to evaluate this remediation of hot hemp, where we would take that hemp past 0.3% total THC and see if there's things we can do to bring that back down to be able to make that sellable. As far as fiber, we have been focusing most of our efforts on fiber. I've been getting a lot of pressure from the Tennessee, I don't want to say industry, but forming industry of fiber hemp to really provide information for planting dates. Can we no-till? What is its climate smart potential and things like that? But we have been decorticating where we separate that outermost layer of the herd, called the bass from the herd on all of our plots. So we do have a lot of data coming through the pipeline. If there ever is a market that develops, hopefully we can support those growers that have interest in growing hemp. And so, again, we're getting more and more pressure to support the developing fiber industry. And this is 2 slides that I stole from the Hemp Alliance of Tennessee, where they were, I forget what they were using this for, but the largest target in Tennessee is Blue Oval City. And Blue Oval City is where Ford is going to be making the electric trucks. Apparently, there's some discussion from some Tennessee companies that they think that they can include hemp and internal components that you see around this car into Volkswagen and Ford products in the future. The idea being that with EV or electric vehicles, that they need to be lighter, and they seem to think that this would work in that capacity. But they tend to have a lot of end uses that are apparently out there. And I'm not saying that we are or are not right or wrong, but there is a vast array of clientele that we have in hemp. And it's amazing being in the position that I'm in, trying to screen those questions and develop a program that answers those questions when there's really no market that's developed to really support these questions. So, Bob, any information you can give me on that, I will gladly take that. But before I forget, there's also been a lot of interest in non-woven textiles. Apparently, there's an operation that has location in East Tennessee and Las Vegas where they do non-wovens, and they've already included hemp in theirs. There's in Nashville, there's a feminine hygiene product that's manufactured there in Nashville that's also wanting to use hemp. So I do see a lot of momentum, and I hope that it takes off, because I think that this will give a very good rotational crop to fit in a system that farmers can use to make profit. So one of the things that we're going to be focusing on over the next 5 years is evaluating hemp as a climate smart commodity. We were fortunate that we got selected in the Climate Smart Ag call from USDA NRCS for funding. We partnered up with Tennessee State University and Hemp Alliance of Tennessee, as well as the Department of Ag. And we were awarded almost $5 million to basically monitor greenhouse gas benefits for hemp, track soil carbon sequestration, which in my opinion, 5 years is nowhere near enough time for that. And then also develop markets targeting underserved producers, minority producers, women, veterans, and as well as farmers in economically distressed counties in Tennessee. So that was kind of the premises behind the grants, or the grant. Tennessee State is the lead, and we're supporting more of the research side with some of the greenhouse gas, soil carbon. My part of the big puzzle is more of the nutrient management side. But the Hemp Alliance of Tennessee is going to essentially take the pilot project, take the raw materials that comes from the subsidized hemp, because we're removing the barriers with subsidizing the hemp. So we're going to provide the seed and et cetera, and then we're going to take that product. Hemp Alliance is going to find processors to try to evaluate those products as a substitute or as an additional into some existing and novel markets. So that's kind of the premise for this work. I'm a little bit nervous, mostly excited for what will become with this. So stay tuned. Maybe in 4 or 5 years, I can come back or host y'all down in Tennessee, and you can see what progress that we've made. So I did want to focus a little bit of time on some floral hemp before I wrap things up and try to put a few targeted points to graduate students. And we put out a trial where we hand planted 2 varieties on 6-foot centers. This is us putting this trial in where we evaluated 4 rates of nitrogen in a check. And essentially, we're trying to develop that nitrogen response curve. And essentially, we weren't able to do that. And so the first year, we had, again, 2 varieties here. 2021, 2022, cherry wine and sweet, and then we had our 0 and then up to 200 units of nitrogen. And Rebecca, you can call me out on this one. So So we put this trial out in hopes of seeing a response, but I learned a very important lesson on this and the previous crop. So I know in our tobacco recommendations, we have our nitrogen recommendations based on what's crop and soil drainage classification have. And so I thought that we would see a response even if we followed some, but there's so much residual nitrogen there that our checks we were better off just to leave nitrogen off completely. And so in the second year, we followed tobacco. In one variety, we did see somewhat, at least a numerical reduction in our yield in pounds per plant for our checks compared, but one variety didn't really respond regardless. So I decided that this was not the effort that I wanted to go down, and I would rather look at total THC and answering the question of if we can remediate hot hemp, and hot being a reference to above 0.3% total THC. And well, the first year in 2021, again, it's cherry wine in Sweden. The harvest is actually the DEA sample where we take the upper 6 inches of the main branch. We sent that off to a lab, and these are the numbers we got for harvest. So we're at 0.34, 0.39 in our first year. So we were technically above the threshold for total THC. And so what we did was we cured that down, the whole plant, and then we took all that floral material off, blended that together, and then we resent that off to the lab to try to see if that would reduce our total THC. And in the first year of the study, we did not. This red bar is where 0.3% is. And as you can see, in cherry wine, it was 0.34, 0.35. In sweetened, it was 0.39, 0.37. Now, I'm not going to show the CBD data, but we were able to remediate CBD, but we were not able to remediate total THC. Now, in the second year, we did the same thing. We pushed the hemp a little bit further. We ignored Dr. Pierce's advice, and we kept letting that grow and grow and grow, and essentially turned this into what's legal in Kentucky now. But we were able to remediate this, and I don't exactly know why we were able to remediate in one year and not the other. I don't know if it was simply the dry curing year that we had in 2022 that we didn't have in 2021, or exactly what it is, because we did everything else the exact same. So there's a little bit of, I might need to run a future study on this to see, but we were able to remediate one year and not the other. So of course, my recommendation to growers that call and ask me is sample timing. Follow the recommendations, sample when you, before you're about to harvest, make sure you're not exceeding that. So to show some variety results for fiber, thankfully, we were able to secure some seed with some help of colleagues here. And this is a picture of our variety trial. This is mainly looking at the Chinese genetics that we were able to get. And we had some really good growth. They never really turned it off. And our French or European genetics did. And so it's been kind of a weird thing, because growers that are starting to grow fiber showed up to this field day we had, and they saw these monstrous Chinese genetics, 10, 12 feet tall, and they saw the European genetics over here 6 to 8 foot tall. And it became real apparent to me that we need a quality control mechanism in place to be able to recommend what growers need to be doing for whatever markets that we have coming down the pipeline. Because out there anecdotally they say, or at least I'm hearing, that 6 to 8 foot tall is what you kind of need. But growers are really interested in for quality, but growers are really interested in the more yield. And I don't know how you'd ever have a field of this where you cut and ret appropriately. But we did evaluate several cultivars, and Yuma 2 or Yuma was our higher performing. These are European genetics. These data are a little bit misleading, because these were way past maturity. They had already declined, and we just let the Chinese genetics keep on going and going and going. And finally, we decided, yeah, it's time to cut. But we were able to get 3 to 4 tons dry yield per acre on a lot of our Chinese genetics. We were able to get that in some of our European genetics as well. But these never turned off. I don't know if you guys have seen that here in Lexington, but you could just plant it and it just keeps going. So we also decided to do some reading work. And one of the things that with this developing market that seems to be happening in Tennessee is that these companies think that the growers won't be able to ret or control rot of the stem appropriately for these various markets. And so I think my program next year or this year is going to look at some different chemical retting. Maybe we can spray something on to start the retting. I don't know if it'll work, but we might try to evaluate some of those things. But we essentially grew a block of an RCBD of fiber hemp that we cut the same, everything was the same. We cut it the same day, and we let that ret for various lengths of time. And then we would, on the time of sampling, we would rake all that up, bundle it, and take it to a greenhouse and dry it. And what we found was not much difference in terms of quality from what we were able to see. So I think there has to be a quality standard that we find in the future that we can all, kind of like federal grade for tobacco, use for hemp. But we did notice that herd is, again, the innermost part of that fiber hemp. After about 14 days, you start getting these black spots that form. And here is what you would see at time 0. And then you get some various levels of retting. The guys that were there at the field that seemed to be somewhat knowledgeable of retting, they were trying to show us how you take that bass fiber and you pull it apart and you want to see what you see right here. This would be your ideal type retted, and then here would be under and here would be over. So we're trying to address what a grower could look at to see, if it's appropriately retted or not. And I don't know a real good way to do that. So if there's any people in the audience that want to collaborate on some retting time work, particularly since it's a function of time and moisture and microbes, maybe there's some ways to collaborate on some research that we can develop some tools for growers and any potential new market coming down the pipeline. But here's our yield from that trial. I will say that these yields are the most, the yields that I have the most confidence in, because we harvested the whole plot, we weighed the whole plot. We know based on our small plots that this will be our yield estimate. So this is time after harvest. We have 0 to 28 days, and this is tons per acre. The fresh weight would be at the time that we picked it up before we took it to dry, and then the orange bars would be the dry. And that's what we saw after it set in the field for 0 all the way to 28 days. And so on time 0, 11.5 tons fresh, drop down to 4.8, 4.9 dry, and then the dry continually numerically, I guess, reduced down to about 3.75 by the end of the month. But mostly all I take from this is that we need to work on ways to identify when to remove the harvested hemp from the field, and how do we determine what visual characteristics can growers use to be able to make that determine that factor. So lastly, I wanted to finish up with some of the work that we're doing. If anybody is interested in some hops, we are venturing into the hops world. This is the hop farm in Knox County, one of the ones we visited when we were planting our yard. This is me with Dr. Dave Lockwood and Dr. Zach Hansen. This is on Tuesday. We started putting the poles in. We have 25-foot poles that we're putting 5 foot in the ground. This is one of the students that we have demonstrating how deep the poles are going. We follow extension recommendations for soil testing, but essentially we're going to have 3 areas of the yard where we're evaluating various varieties of hops, and then we're going to have agronomy, where we're going to evaluate supplemental lighting to see if we can compare our yields to Washington and Yakima Valley, where they grow hops very well. As well as we know that downy mildews and those things will be a problem, so that's where Zach's major interest will be for the foreseeable future. And one of the exciting things with doing this, there's already a UT wines collaboration. There's a UT cider, there's UT ice cream and dairy. With this, the UT Foundation is partnering up with one of the big brewers in Tennessee, and it looks like that we're going to have a UT beer coming down the pipeline. with an endowment that funds student experience through scholarships and things like that. And that brew would be sold special release, football season and all that. So hopefully we get some interest in that, because a lot of the growers, there's about 10 or 15 cost producers that have been calling, asking for this information, and 140 brewers are interested. So for the graduate students, now that I've bored you for with tobacco, hemp, and hops for about 40 minutes or so, or 50 minutes, I wanted to put some key points here that you can read and take home with you as you start to finish up here or start here and go on to your career. And so first, I think it's very important to get experience with all the missions of the land grant institution while you're here. If your advisor is mainly research, it doesn't hurt to ask them for teaching opportunities or extension opportunities, because that will pay off, because most appointments that I see coming up, at least through faculty or within our department, seem to be a split of various research, extension, or research teaching, or really any combination, or a three-way split. So make sure you try to guest lecture, find that TA opportunity, try to find some grant writing opportunities, whether that be through federal sources or industry sources, and present those field days. And I will say that networking at conferences, I heard this as a graduate student, all the faculty here would always tell me, network, network, network. I would go so far to say that at the conference budget, get up at 6 a.m., go have coffee with everybody in the room, and stay around till after the conference is over and have whatever choice beverage that you want to have with it, whether that's tea or something else. Because a lot of those contacts I still use today, and it's nice to have those kind of contacts at conferences. And then we talked about this at lunch. I'll just reiterate, practice budgeting, because a lot of the job that I took at Canada, and a lot of my job now also involves a lot of budgeting and proposal writing. So work on getting some experience, and thankfully it looks like the GSA here has been getting some money, and that's kudos to you guys, hard work. So yeah, make sure you put that on your CVs as you go to apply for whatever job you're applying for. And something that's really worked for me is finding 3 mentors. One in academia, if you're going in academia or not, find somebody in the industry that you trust to bounce ideas off of, and somebody completely unrelated to anything you're doing. And that's really worked for me, because if I have something that's on my mind, I can bounce ideas off the 3 of them and get really diverse information that I can try to make the best decision. I think I heard that some folks in the department, in the Graduate Student Association, are doing these certificate programs, but I highly recommend that. There's a college teaching and learning here at UK. If you're going to be here for a while, take those courses in the applied statistics. Both of those 2 programs have really worked out for me. Mainly, you get more connections for going with that, but you also change your frame of thinking on your approach to some things, particularly with college teaching and learning, because I'm used to speaking to farmers. I feel like I'm pretty good at farmers, but whenever I guest lecture on campus to undergraduates that care nothing about ag or nothing about what I'm talking about, it really, I rely back on some of this, because it's fun to change how you talk to the various crowds that you talk, and not talking to, whether that be a government group or undergraduates that are not interested at all. Understanding your transferable skills. We've had a lot of interviews coming through our department recently. We had UT just did this massive buyout of time. We had a lot of people take that retirement option. So we've been interviewing about 4 candidates per position, and we have, I think, 6 or 8 currently searching right now. Some of the ones that are doing better in the interview process are highlighting those transferable skills that they're bringing to the table that you may not see from a typical graduate student entering the faculty role or an industry role. At the CPRF, that they really place emphasis on soft skills, and so I highly recommend enhancing those soft skills while in grad school, and putting those, making sure they're evident in your application package, particularly your cover letter, which is what I think most people read first. So read the job description. And lastly, this is kind of the words that I've been living by for the last 5.5, 6 years. Is if you don't address it, you endorse it. And that's words that I've been living by. If you see something, address it, because if you don't address it, you're essentially endorsing that. And so that has really came in handy in my program. And that doesn't have to be a negative lot. Don't think that, even though it can be, but your approach to conflict management and those kinds of things, because undoubtedly you're gonna encounter some unpleasant situations, and it can be something as simple as salary, going to whoever that is that signs the front of your check to talk about those kinds of things. But with that, I'll say that it does take a village to have a program and to form your ideas and what you're going to be working on. So this is just some pictures of our crew, some of the interns, some of the graduate students, some of the staff at our various stations. We were fortunate enough to go tour some of the facilities over in Hopkinsville, Kentucky for some of the tobacco companies, and here's some of our conferences, graduate students. So with that, I'll take any questions, and thanks for having me. I'm very honored to be here today. It was nice to see some people, and it was nice to hang out with the graduate students for most of the day. Special shout out to you, Monica, for making it a very easy process. So thank you all.
We have any questions for Mitchell? Well, check chat for me there. Is there anything on that one? Let's do it. All right, well, we have one more thing to finish out here, Mitchell. So Sarah, if you want to come on up.
You already know this is for you, but I still need to wait a minute. So, thank you for the amazing presentation. As some of you know, that IPSS graduate students every semester we vote for one earlier career alumni award. So this year we're glad to have you, Dr. Richmond, and we are really impressed by your international and domestic working experience, and we are really appreciate that you're so involved at the GSA while it's in its years as well. So welcome home, and